How's it going, everyone? As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne, and this is PSReady, my channel all about PlayStation. In today's video, I've got three awesome topics to cover. The first one is that PlayStation Stars is coming back, and there's a lot of details surrounding it. Next, we're going to talk about how it was just determined that the PS5 is the best console, and we're going to talk about why. And finally, Capcom just did a live stream where they confirmed Resident Evil 9 is in development, but I, the Resident Evil fan here on the internet, am going to tell you why this is even more exciting than just the news on its face. So let's talk about this whole PlayStation Stars thing. All right, so we know that for a month now it's been down, which officially makes that longer than the great PSN outage that happened during the PS3 generation and completely ruined an entire summer for my friends and I. I've talked about this a lot lately. We all know what PlayStation Stars is. It's the rewards program for PlayStation. We all know why it's good. You can get PlayStation Store credit, free games, X, Y, and Z, and on top of buying games, you can earn points by completing campaigns. It's been down for a month, and that really sucks. So today, Sony announced that it is finally coming back, which is great. I'm not gonna discount that, but because it's Sony, it can't just be a thing where they turn it back on and say, go nuts, go check that your points are there and everything like that. They're rolling it out regionally, and they gave no details outside of that. I looked into it. It's like, as far as I know, it's not available on my phone right now. I checked right before I recorded this video. And yeah, so when I check it on my phone, it's still giving me that message that says PlayStation Stars will be returning in phased regional rollouts. The only one that has it back at this point is Asia. So hopefully by the end of the day, or by the time you see this video, PlayStation Stars is back. I really need to hear from Sony on this. I think there should be an allocation of free points. They took the service down for a month. They gave us no explanation. They were kind of wishy-washy with a lot of people through community service or customer service or whatever you want to call it, where they were like, some people were saying, yeah, your points are being collected. Some people were saying they weren't. It was a confusing time, and it's completely unnecessary, especially if, as it comes back, it's working exactly as before. I want to know why this went down, and I want some reassurance from Sony that it's not going to happen in the future, because I don't know, I paid $500 for this console. They introduced this feature no one really asked for, and it turned out being pretty good. So I want it to work as intended all the time. I have no sympathy for Sony in this scenario, whatever happened to them with it, because I paid money for the console, and the way you get points in most cases is by buying games, right? I've seen the comments, I've seen the PlayStation messages from you guys. A lot of people were holding off on buying games because they wanted to make sure they were getting their rewards points, and I personally don't blame them, because in the past, Sony has done nothing but prove that we can't trust them when it comes to anything online related, or, lately being consumer friendly. I've actually bought a couple games in the time that it was down, so I really hope I get those points, because there's a couple of cars I want to get in Gran Turismo 7. I'm going to talk about that in the weekend video. There's allegedly a huge update coming to the game, because they're not doing it in a blog post, they're doing it in a live stream. But yeah, I want to spend some money on the PlayStation Store, and I've been waiting for this to come back to do that, because I have enough points to get at least $25 worth of credit, and it would just be stupid for me to spend that cash when I have the opportunity at some point, whenever this does roll out in America, to use my points that I have accrued by buying games to do so. I really think the path forward for them is to separate this out from the PlayStation app as well. This is clearly a service people used. I discovered it this year, and when I talked about it and was like, hey, you can get free games, people were like, yeah, we've been doing that for over a year at this point, and a lot of people responded. That's one of the biggest videos I've released this year, so it seems like something that's worth investing in on the back end for Sony, in my opinion at least. It would be awesome if they had a separate PlayStation Stars app like Xbox does for Microsoft Rewards, and it would be even better because while PlayStation has been making Stars better as time has gone on, the Xbox Rewards app has been getting worse and worse. They've been taking away ways to get points in that app, so you can't accrue enough to pay for your Game Pass or buy full-on games like you can on the PlayStation version. Still, I don't want to complain too much. I'm glad that this is back, so hopefully we don't have to wait long to get access to PlayStation Stars, because as of right now, it is only available in Asia. All right, let's talk about why the PS5 has just been proven to be the best console. So Digital Foundry, one of my favorite channels on the internet, they get into the nitty-gritty of patches, how games run, how games look, what performance techniques they're using, what graphical techniques they're using. If you're not watching them, you definitely should be. But one one of their recent videos had a really cool premise in the sense that we've seen a lot of games that come out multi-platform that should run worse on the PS5 than the Series X, because on paper, the Series X is a much stronger console. I think it's like a 30% difference or something like that. We've seen a lot of games that come out on both consoles running and looking better on the PlayStation 5. And a lot of people have been wondering why that is. So Digital Foundry dug into it, and what they found is actually really cool. So if you want the nitty gritty, the whole technical analysis, definitely go watch the full video, but I'm going to summarize it. Essentially what's happening here is that even though on paper and in reality, the Xbox Series X is the stronger console, it's much more optimized on the PlayStation side of the fence. So when it's calling up textures, when it's calling up new areas of a map, when it's trying to load animations, whenever it's really doing anything that accesses the hardware, like the actual speaking of the game to the hardware itself, the PS5 just does everything a lot faster because it's so much more optimized. Like the pipeline they have is a lot easier for developers to work with than the Xbox Series X. So while we've heard all these rumors and everything that the PS5 and Series X are tapped out, it's really the case that it's really not the case, and what's happening is the PS5 is just easier to work with than the Series X, and there is more headroom to pull out of the Series X for sure, but I'd imagine the same thing is true for the PlayStation 5, because as time goes on, these developers are going to continue to learn to work with this console. Like when Stellar Blade 2 comes out, I'd imagine that it'll look and run a lot better than the first game because they have all that experience of developing on the PlayStation 5. Also, there was another news story that went around last week that I kind of saw slip under the radar, where developers who have worked with PlayStation before have said PlayStation goes way out of their way to make sure games run well on the console. Like they have a whole dedicated team of people that they'll send out to your studio to help you get games looking and running better on the console. They'll help you figure out how to implement the DualSense. They'll help you figure out how to market your game. They'll help you with PR. They want games to succeed on their platform, and they are willing to pay people within PlayStation internally that just have a sole job of making games look and run as good as possible on the PS5. And I don't want to make it look like Xbox doesn't do that, because we've heard examples where games had to be delayed, like Baldur's Gate 3, because Xbox has a clause that says you can't release a game on the Xbox Series S that doesn't have the same features as the Series X, or you can't do a staggered release where you release on the Series X first and then release on the Series S later. So what they do is they send Xbox engineers out to help developers like Larian figure out how to get co-op and everything working right on the underpowered console that is the Xbox Series S. But I just think this is a really cool combination of things where it takes time to actually make a console that makes it easy for developers to develop games. And when you have these back-end systems that make the development process that much easier, that's what really sets a PC apart from a console, at least in my opinion, because the best part about playing on a console is that you can just sit down, turn on your TV, turn on your controller, and then just get right into the game. That has been the best part about playing Gran Turismo 7. I've been playing it a lot. If you watch the channel recently, you know that. I play a lot of racing games though, and my favorite one is Forza Horizon 4 and 5. I switch between those on my PC with my racing wheel, and there's always some random issue, right? Like my wheel doesn't detect, the turning radius gets switched around because, you know, you have to use the external Logitech software to change the degree of the wheel to 540. That never saves, so I got to go into the software because I'm spinning out, and I'm like, oh, it switched back to 900 degrees. Great. I have to drop it down to 540. Then it doesn't work in the game, so I have to quit the game and restart the game. It's like, I don't want that headache 90% of the time, because when I'm making videos, when I'm working on my house, like I just cleaned out my garage this week with my wife and it was a huge pain in the ass. The only thing I want to do is just sit down and play some video games. And beyond the fact that I think comparing Horizon and Gran Turismo as products, Gran Turismo is a better quality product. The biggest thing that gets me playing that game over the one that I can actually use the steering wheel with is the fact that it is so dead simple to get going, and it just looks and runs so damn good on the PS5. Like if it comes out on PC this year like it's supposed to, and it doesn't have any save transferring or anything like that, there's no way I'm going to buy it, because it's just a great experience on the PlayStation 5, and I have all my stuff unlocked there, so there's no reason for me to play and get a little bit better graphics and a little bit better frame rates. It just doesn't make sense. So yeah, this is all cool technical stuff. If you're into that, again, I highly urge you to go check out Digital Foundry's video, but that's like exciting to me because this is something, if you've been watching the channel since I started it right around the time the PS5 was out, it's something that I've been really curious about because on paper and raw power speaking, the Xbox should have better performance. And there are some games where that is the case for sure, but the vast majority of third-party stuff, people just default to on PS5 because it looks and runs that much better. So I was always curious about it. I'm glad we got the answer. So the real lesson here to learn for Microsoft and Sony is don't rush your consoles out. Give them time to develop and make sure you have these pipelines in place, because even if you have the weaker console, the thing that's going to help in the long run in terms of getting games to look and run well on that console is making sure that developing for it is better and easier, and you're going to be able to take advantage of the actual hardware in a cool way versus having to spend a lot of time figuring out how to optimize your game to take advantage of it, versus the console itself already having pipelines and software experiences in place that know how to implement the hardware effectively, so developers don't have to spend time working on that stuff and they can just spend time working on the actual game. I think it's a net positive overall, and every console maker should learn from this experience. Anyway, that brings us to the third news story, which is that Capcom, they continue their winning streak by announcing that Resident Evil 9 is in development. Now that's exciting on its own. We've heard a lot of leaks around what this is supposed to be. The fact that it's going to be the first open world Resident Evil game, that shouldn't really be shocking to people, because if you look at Resident Evil Village, it feels like the tech demo for an open world Resident Evil game. I don't know if you guys have played it, but the way the game is set up is the village itself is actually a hub world, and there's 4 levels in the game that are tied to specific bosses. So you always go back to the hub world and it opens up, but it feels almost open world in the sense that like when you go down the pathway to the next area, it feels like it's all connected. So it's not totally open world, it's more open area, but it feels like it's right there. So it feels logically like the next step should be an open world Resident Evil game. And if you want more proof, Resident Evil has always done stuff like this where they tease things or implement features in a small way in one game and then expand on it later. Like look at Resident Evil 4 Remake, for example, and look at the AI of Luis and Ashley or anyone who's fighting with you. The whole part of the game where you have to fend off a bunch of the Resident Evil 4 zombie, not zombie, whatever you want to call them, the infected, in a cabin. Luis's AI is so massively improved from the original Resident Evil 4 that it's very obvious they want to make sure for Resident Evil 5 that it can be played fully single player and it won't have all those barriers and annoyances that the original version of Resident Evil 5's remake had. And of course, we know they're also working on Resident Evil 0. And if you didn't know, there's a whole mechanic in that game where you actually play as 2 characters. You play as Billy and Rebecca. You can switch back and forth between them, and the whole puzzle system in that game is built around that mechanic. So you can kind of see in Resident Evil 4 Remake that they're getting ready to implement those features later on. So yeah, it seems like the whole open world thing being the continuation of Resident Evil Village just makes a lot of sense. So the fact that they're working on Resident Evil 9, that's exciting on its own. But the biggest reason, the singular awesome reason that's getting me so much more excited for this game than I was for Village is because of the guy who's spearheading the development of it. So Resident Evil 9 is being spearheaded by Koshi Nakanishi. And why is that important? Well, he's the guy who developed Resident Evil 7. He's the guy who looked at Resident Evil 6, did not see it as the correct way for Resident Evil to go in terms of being like a huge action game, not a survival horror game. So he really took the game back to its roots. And I've played the vast majority of the Resident Evil games at this point. I think honestly I've played all of them except like maybe the Game Boy Color one. And out of all of them, Resident Evil and Resident Evil 7 are the 2 scariest games because they emphasize horror. There's a lot of great horror movie callbacks in Resident Evil 7. Like the biggest touchstone for them was Evil Dead 2, where you're just an everyman. You know, Ash Williams, he's just a guy. You get stuck in a cabin. Ethan gets his leg cut off. Ash gets his hand cut off because it gets infected by a deadite. There's a whole chainsaw boss battle where you're fighting Jack Baker in the basement. But that whole house, like that whole first level where you're creeping through the house, you're getting your leg like cut off by a shovel and you have to use the juice to like put it back on. That game is legitimately scary. And when you compare that to Resident Evil Village, I mean, like that game's not scary at all. There's one part where you're going through a creepy house and there's like mannequins and there's like a big worm baby boss, but like that's the scariest part of the game, honestly. It feels more like action based like Resident Evil 4 than Resident Evil 7 did. That's what I'm trying to say. So having this guy who didn't work on Resident Evil Village really directing Resident Evil 9, I'm like crossing my fingers that they go back to making this a truly scary horror franchise again, because they said with Village, they listened to people's feedback and people were complaining that that 7 was too scary. That was so dumb in my opinion. They should have just made it even scarier and said, this is for a new audience, get used to it, this is what we're doing. But hopefully they can course correct with Resident Evil 9. And if you want more proof that this guy is more interested in making scary Resident Evil games, he's the guy who spearheaded Resident Evil Revelations, which like, that was one of the first games I think I played after Resident Evil 5, because I didn't play 6 until I think last year, honestly. And Resident Evil Revelations, even though it was on the 3DS, was a great step in the right direction. You got to play as Jill again, you got to play as Chris in some parts. It was actually a little bit scary, like the whole game took place on a derelict cruise ship, and like, yeah, it was on the 3DS, so it wasn't really all that scary. Once I played it on my Steam Deck a couple of years ago, I was like, man, this guy knows what he's doing. And he also developed the Resident Evil Mercenaries game that's criminally underrated. So yeah, as far as Resident Evil goes, I was never not hopeful because it is my favorite game franchise, and like even the worst games in the series, and I would never even get close to calling Village one of the worst games in the series. It just wasn't what I wanted. They're still really good games. So like, yeah, even the worst Resident Evil is something that I would enjoy playing. But knowing that the guy who kind of re-revolutionized the franchise and brought it back to its roots with 7, that gets me extremely excited for Resident Evil 9. As for when it's going to be out, Capcom's pretty cool about this. Like, they make it look like they just started development, but usually when they announce that they're working on a game, it's basically almost complete. And so I would guess that this will be out probably around September or October of next year. And yeah, as far as like next gen games go, I think Resident Evil has done a good job this generation, even with games like Resident Evil 4 Remake being split between generations. That felt like a next gen game, and it is my favorite game of all time. So like, I don't know why I'm defending myself here. It's like, it is my favorite game of all time. I still play it regularly. So yeah, I'm so excited about the future of Resident Evil. I've got 4 re-downloaded on my PS5 ready to boot up tonight, just because, yeah, I'm just like over the moon about everything I'm hearing about Resident Evil 9. Anyway, guys, that's all I've got for you today. As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching, and shape on.